Please note that the views expressed on this program are those of the individuals who speak them, and not necessarily those of Portsmouth Community Radio, its Board of Trustees, members, volunteers, or underwriters. Good evening and welcome to Spirit Radio. I am your host, Willy Hassell. Along with my co-host, Lynn Nickerson, we will take you on a journey into the unknown where the paranormal becomes the normal. A journey to a world cloaked in darkness where reality becomes a thin veil. So sit back, relax, and join us as we venture into the shadows, the darkness, the unknown, and back. Okay, good evening and welcome to Spirit Radio, the Paranormal Experience. I am your host, Willy Hassell, your gatekeeper to the dark side, your guide to the realm of the unknown, the unseen, the unthinkable. And she is the always lovely, the always mystical, and the mysterious. She is Lynn Nickerson. Good evening, Lynn.
Good evening, Willy.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
No, I can't hear you again.
Oh, dear.
This is not good.
All right.
You're on the. You got to switch to 3.
Does that work?
That's much better. That's
Very
much better.
odd. Okay. We're good.
As I said before, the joys of live radio. Okay. Well, I don't want to eat up too much time here, but I do want to mention that we had a good afternoon this afternoon at the James House.
Oh, gosh, yes. That was really nice.
In Hampton.
Yeah, fundraiser drive.
Fundraiser for the James House Historical Museum in Hampton.
Yeah, this beautiful 1723 house is in need of funds.
And that was fun. It was a good afternoon.
Certainly was.
Like I said, we don't want to waste too much time here because we do have a very good guest on the line tonight. And so I want to go ahead and introduce him. And tonight's guest is Dennis Stone, who is the owner and operator of America's Stonehenge in Salem, New Hampshire. Originally, it was called Mystery Hill Caves. I remember that.
I do too.
I grew up part of the time in Salem when I was just a little. Built by a Native American culture or a migrant European population. Who knows? No one knows for sure. A maze of man-made chambers, walls, and ceremonial meeting places. America's Stonehenge is most likely the oldest man-made construction in the United States at over 4,000 years. And like Stonehenge in England, America's Stonehenge was built by ancient people well-versed in astronomy and stone construction. It has been determined that the site is an accurate astronomical calendar. It was and still can be used to determine specific solar and lunar events of the year. Dennis's father originally opened the site to the public in 1958, and then he purchased the property in 1963. So Dennis has grown up and spent most of his life surrounded by the mysteries of America's Stonehenge. So please, let us welcome tonight to Spirit Radio, Dennis Stone. Good evening, Dennis.
Oh, good evening. Thank you for having me on this evening.
Hi, Dennis. Nice to have you on board.
Yes, thank you for joining us.
I'm happy to be here.
So how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty well.
Good. So you've had, I heard, some very interesting visitors lately.
Yeah, we've had a number of different people at the site. And I think about a month ago we had a number from History Channel, one of the shows from history. We had 3 of them walk in one day. And I didn't know who they were initially, and I found out right afterwards who they were. And then we stayed in correspondence. It was quite a surprise to see them walking in one after the other. And then about a week later we had another gentleman come in. And he's been on some of the History Channel, and some of the same shows, as a matter of fact, Ancient Aliens and some of those type of shows on History Channel.
Interesting. Did they walk in with their... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say it's kind of neat to see them. I was sort of surprised, too, because they weren't unannounced, and all of a sudden they're walking in, and I started recognizing them as they were walking through the door, I'm like, I think I know who these people are.
That is neat.
Yeah, this is cool, huh?
Did they walk in with their cameras?
They did. Actually, they did, yeah. And they came in, like, 3 of them came in, and then another one came in after that, and they were filming, and that was, I was like, who are these people filming inside, which is okay with us, but why are they filming in here,
Yeah.
And then then it sort of occurred to me, and then I was on a little bit later with Mark Eddy, and figured out who all these people were, and then he started contacting us, and so we've been in correspondence with him since that time. But yeah, that was about a month ago. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Do you want to say who they were, or is that secret?
Oh yeah, well we had L.A. Mazzulli. He's written a couple of several books. He lives on the West Coast. He's been on a number of different TV. He has his own show on too. I'm trying to think what the it's like Watch.
The Watchers.
Now, but he has his own show. You might be familiar with it. And but he's been on a lot of the History Channel shows, and he had us on his radio show actually back right after we were on the History Show with Scott Walters, and that aired about 2.5 years ago. And he got in touch with my son and myself, and we were on a show, I think the spring of 2013. And then he came out and visited us 2 years later. So we saw him about a month ago.
Oh, that's
and he
neat.
came in, I think, about 3 weeks ago, 3 to 4 weeks ago. And then the week before that's when we had Jim Vieira, and his show and History Show is called...
Oh, yeah, the Giants.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And he's a member of the New England Antiquities Research Association, a group my dad started in 1964.
Oh, great.
And I saw a couple of YouTubes of him talking, and I thought he was very interesting about... He's a mason, about the walls and how... And we have the similar type walls at our site, and with big, some of them have big boulders in them. They call them pearl necklace walls, where the walls join all these great big glacial erratics or boulders and cairns and all sorts of interesting walls. But he's also very interested in, when he was researching that, he came across a lot of a lot of history about the giants, skeletons, that type of thing. And his show was on last year. And then with him was Hugh Newman from England, and he's on Ancient Aliens a lot. In fact, he was on, I think last night I saw him on it. And Andrew Collins. And Andrew's been on he's on that show all the time. You turn it on, he's on there. And so it was kind of neat. Those 3 guys came walking in the door, and it was kind of a surprise to all of us at America's Stonehenge. And so, but we've attracted people over the years, a lot of interesting people too, since the 1930s actually. So it's been going on for quite a few decades.
Well, what I wanted to do is get into their theories in just a little bit, but I wanted to start sort of at the beginning. After, the site has been around for a long, long time, and people sort of like in this last century decided that maybe there was something to this. Now, back in the 60s, I was there, and I saw all these stones, and I really thought it was a lot of nothing. I thought that they were just trying to make something out of nothing, but the only thing that really bothered me was the sacrificial stone. I had a hard time explaining that away as being nothing, because it obviously was what it was. So what I'd like to know, Dennis, is when did they start looking at this as a possible archaeological, astronomical, megalithic site? When did they start taking this seriously?
People have known about the site going back when the Patty family bought it back in 1734. Of course, they didn't know what the site was.
But they didn't know what it was.
Shoemakers.
Yeah.
Yeah, 5 generations of shoemakers. But in 1907, the History of Salem was written by Edgar Gilbert. And actually, there was another author who started the book, The History of Salem, and he passed away, I guess, and then Edgar Gilbert picked it up. And he was a very close friend of Robert Frost, the poet. And they both worked together in the mills. But they wrote about the History of Salem, and our site is brought up in 1907. And again, that book started in the late 1800s, the 1890s, I think. So that information comes from that time period. And it talks about a beautiful place among the rough boulders and soft pines where weird tales may be woven. And that the Patty family were up there. And they were shoemakers, actually, 5 generations of shoemakers. And they took the Underground Railway and everything with the slaves. Our site was part of the Underground Network. And so there's a lot of history tied in with the site. But it wasn't until the 1930s that people actually began doing research on the site, and that was Mr. Goodwin of Hartford, Connecticut. He was an antiquarian, and he believed, he knew of a couple other sites before he came upon our site and learned about our site, but he thought initially he thought the Vikings had built our site when he first saw it, but as he uncovered, he actually bought the property in 1936, and he hired a crew, and the foreman was an MIT engineer named Roscoe Whitney. And Roscoe made some really nice diagrams, plan views, and profile views of the site with using a plane table back then. So we have some nice records of the site as they first found it, and photographs, because Mr. Pearson, who my dad bought the site from, actually introduced Goodwin to the site back in 35, 36. And so they photographs from the very beginning, before Mr. Goodwin began his work, and during the time that he worked on the site. He hired a crew, because he was pretty elderly at the time, and he lived in Hartford. He was a millionaire. And his first cousin's J.P. Morgan, and they have a collection in Hartford today that's still part of the collection from J.P. Morgan and William Goodwin, their first cousins.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, Goodwin was interested in Columbus, the Vikings, and any kind of ancient history. And when he came upon our site, he was amazed by it. He was totally taken away by the site.
Well, Dennis,
he worked on Indian mounds out west, and he was looking for where Columbus landed down in the Caribbean. So he was involved with all sorts of stuff, including Leif Erikson. So he thought the site might be Viking. But as he uncovered, he says, not Viking site, it looks like an Irish Chaldean monastery.
Well, if I could ask you, when Goodwin attained the property, wasn't it all covered with shrubs and trees and whatnot? How did he decide that it needed further looking into, that it might be something more significant than just a pile of rocks?
Yeah, he did have a lot of debris. It had a lot of, both from time and from when the Patty family was there, the third generation that was up on the site, Jonathan. Around that time period, these what we call quarrymen were up there stripping out the stone ruins, and we estimate about a third to a half is missing today. And they started stripping the stone and using it for other building projects in the local area, and they caused a lot of damage. So between time and earthquakes and debris accumulating, brush and trees, when Mr. Goodwin came to the site, we do have photographs. There was a lot of it was covered. It was kind of hard to see all the stone ruins, just like when you go down into the Yucatan. You look at the Mayan ruins before they uncovered them. Hard to see, all covered with jungle and everything. Yeah, it's really a mess. You can see the rocks just barely sticking through all the brush, and very difficult to tell what you're looking at. So, but it was photographed, and then they spent a couple of years uncovering all the debris. And as they uncovered it, they started seeing different features, the different chambers, carvings through the bedrock where they made man-made drains. The sacrificial table was kind of exposed. You see the big groove on the top of it, but there's debris on the table. They thought it was sitting on the ground, and when they dug down, they found about 3.5 feet of dirt with the 4 legs. Mm-hmm. One of the legs was sort of damaged, so they restored that leg. But it sits on 4 legs, and it's connected to the oracle chamber, which you might remember from the 60s, the biggest chamber we have up there. So he found a lot of different features and artifacts, and it spent years actually cleaning the site. But he knew it was something. He knew it wasn't just a cellar hole from a farmer. Although Patty really wasn't a farmer, he was a shoemaker by trade, but he did have some domesticated animals.
How did they determine that it was more than just maybe living quarters? How did they determine that perhaps it had astronomical significance?
Oh, yeah. Well, you were there in the 60s. It was around...
Right, it was late 60s.
Late 60s, yeah. We had already begun the work in 1967. In 1959, the Saturday posted a story on us, and they had a nickname for the place in the article. They called it the Stonehenge of America because of the large stones. They didn't know it was astronomically aligned in 1959. But in 1965, there was a CBS special, Stonehenge Decoded, based on Gerald Hopkins' book, Stonehenge Decoded, from 1963. I think that's when that was written. And Mr. Goodwin even knew in the 1930s, he died in 1950, but he knew in the 1930s there were stones surrounding the main site, hundreds of feet from the main site, walls and standing stones, but he didn't have time, the resources, or whatever to look at that. He was focused on the main site where most of the structures are located, which covers about an acre. The whole hilltop we have is about 110 acres, and there's all sorts of archaeological features and structures and walls on that. But he was really focused on the center of the site. There's so much to be done there. So it was 1967 when we began clearing the trees, and we wondered if these stones also marked, like Stonehenge, some of the astronomical alignments of the sun, moon, and possibly stars. And so they began clearing trees. And it wasn't until 1970 that my dad, myself, a neighbor, and our manager, he was pretty young at the time, I think he was like 21 years old or whatever, we all went up on top of the hill on December 21st, 1970, and the weather actually cooperated after 3 years of having clouds and snow and everything. And we actually witnessed the sun setting right over the top of that kind of an arrowhead-shaped stone. And we were like, wow, it works.
Huh.
That's fantastic. In fact, we may be the first people to actually witness that for thousands of years. It sent chills up our back, literally.
Yeah.
Kind of a cold day up there too. But we photographed it, and those photographs we still have. We still show it to people. It's a whole sequence of the sun setting on that stone. But we decided, in order to really prove that it's an astronomical site, we had to hire a surveyor. And we hired a professional survey team to come up, and they were from 1973, working part-time, until 1977. And they surveyed, and they found more of these stones all around the hilltop.
Really?
We had summer solstice, equinoxes, but we had to have them surveyed to see if actually that's what they were,
What do those other stones represent?
Yeah, we have the 4 seasons, which are called quarter days, the quarter days, summer, winter, spring, and fall. And we also have found the cross-quarter days, days in between, such as August 1st, November 1st, February 1st, and May 1st, which are kind of the beginning of the seasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when you say midsummer, actually, you say, well, it's the first day of summer was last Sunday. How come they call it midsummer? Actually, in some of the old counts, like the Celts and some of the old world cultures, including even the ones, some cultures in the Americas, the beginning of summer was actually May 1st. June 21st or 2nd would be midsummer. August 1st would be the end of summer, which we have markers for all of these. Fall would be September 22nd or 1st. And then November 1st would be the beginning of winter, end of fall. And midwinter would be December 21st or 2nd. End of winter would be February 1st. And that's like where Groundhog's Day is today, and Candlemas. And the beginning of spring, and then spring would be March 22nd or 1st, and then it would be the beginning of summer again. Would May 1st would be Beltane. Actually, we call them May, August 1st, February 1st. Actually, it was a couple days later, but people have moved them to the beginning of the month for convenience purposes. But November 1st is All Saints Day, or All Souls Day, or the day after Halloween.
Right.
So we still celebrate some of these cross-border days. And when I went to Cahokia Mountain State Park in Illinois, one of the biggest pyramidal structures in the world, it's called America's Stonehenge. They have the quarter days and the cross-quarter days.
Do they?
But if you go to Europe, the same thing over in Europe. So it's not just a European thing or old world thing.
Oh, that's an interesting connection. Well, at what point was it determined that the site was probably 4,000 years old? Who did that? Who did the dating?
Yes, that was done by two different types of dating. Actually, one of them we were just talking about, astronomical. When we sent the survey, it took a couple of years from 73 to 77. And actually, the people that did the survey are still in contact with us today, and was the president of the New England Surveyors Association. So we got somebody reputable, well-known and well-respected to do the survey work. And they sent it to the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in Cambridge, Mass. back in 77. And when we got the results back, they said, well, if these stones were used for astronomical purposes, it would work approximately 1800 BC, plus or minus about 2 centuries. Due to the Earth's tilt, it's very slowly changing. We're tilted 23 degrees, 27 minutes today. They call that obliquity, the angle that we're tilted. And it very slowly moves. The Earth's axis actually goes up and down. It's a 41,000-year cycle up and down.
Oh.
But the other one that people are more familiar with is the precession of the equinoxes, and that's a 25,920-year cycle. And that changes your seasons. It changes the pole star. But this other tilt actually changes the Tropic of Cancer, Capricorn, the Arctic Circle, and the Antarctic Circle. All of that changes because it's 66.5 degrees, for the Arctic Circle and the Antarctic Circle south.
Does it actually come back, though, after that 4,100 cycle?
The tilt?
Yeah.
Tilt, you mean? It's a 41,000-year cycle. So it's been uprighting itself. It's actually was tilted slightly more 4,000 years ago. It was about 24-degree, 10-minute tilt. The Earth axis was today's 23.5 degrees. They round it's 23 degrees, 27-minute tilt today. So the alignments don't quite work today. The solstices and the equinox, the equator, that's 90 degrees. It's right there. The sun still rises over that on spring and fall. But when you get further away towards the solstices or the lunar cycle, they call it the lunar max north and south, lunar minor north and south, because the moon's orbit's tilted to the Earth's orbit. It's an 18.5-year cycle. Well, that's off today, too. So what they were saying is, if you want to make this work, have the sun actually rise over that stone in the solstice and set over that stone in the solstices, or the moon, you have to go back about 3,800 years, plus or minus about 200 years. If you go back 6 years earlier, 1971, we had already done a couple of carbon datings in a chamber called the Chamber in Ruins. And in 67, 69, and 1971, we had different datings of that structure. By 1971, we had dug down next to the north wall, and we had a sample of charcoal, sent it to Geochrome Laboratories in Cambridge, Mass., and the result was about 4,000 years old. So in 71, we had the oldest date of the main site of 4,000 years old, plus or minus about 250 years. 6 years later, we get the astronomical information back, and that seems to support the carbon dating. So two different methods saying the same date, about 4,000 years old.
Very
so
interesting.
that was quite nice when we got those two things.
Just playing devil's advocate for a minute, could there be a variance enough between two stones, the distance between two stones, that it could be just coincidence, that it appears to be?
You can have, actually, if you only had like a couple of stones up there, you'd say, well, it's just a coincidence. We've had that before. But when you have all these standing stones, we have walls with thousands of stones all around the hilltop. We have actually measured all the miles of stone walls we have. But you have these very, these stones are very obvious. They're standing up, and some of them go up to 10 feet tall.
Wow.
And they're shaped like big arrowheads, and they've been stood on their end.
Almost like an obelisk?
Yeah, kind of, or we call them a monolith, kind of, or an obelisk would probably. Another word for a very tall monolith is called a menhir.
Right.
And these type of stones are found throughout Europe. I mean, there are 50,000 megalithic sites in Europe, and they go into Russia, they go into China, they go into in Korea, North and South Korea. There are about 120 megalithic type sites. And if you look at them, you'll see a very close resemblance to what you find in Western Europe, whether it's Spain, Portugal, Ireland, or Scandinavia, or England, or whatever. But they also are in South America. There's actually an Amazon Stonehenge. So if anybody wants to Google that that's listening, that is fantastic. But Colombia, and I just became aware of Amazon Stonehenge about a month ago from Andrew Collins. And he's visited that, I believe. And I was like, wow. They're also in Colombia, South America, and I have been aware of those for a couple of years. So they're on 5 continents. And our site is not unique. We have, it is kind of in a way, but there are other stone sites from Canada to the mid-Atlantic states. Dry stone construction, no cement was used. Very large roof slabs weighing, many tons. And that's so atypical of what our colonial and post-colonial settlers were doing. They did build big stone foundations, but they used large roof slabs. It's just not typical of what our forefathers were doing. And these big slabs are actually taken off the bedrock, and they were actually shaped using hammerstones. So it's a Stone Age technology, percussion flaking actually. It's like making a very large arrowhead using stone against stone, not metal tools, but a Stone Age technology used to shape or dress these stones. And we had a gentleman that's been with us since 1978, and he's worked on British sites for the British government, both medieval and megalithic. And also, he's a doctor of theology, a doctor of historical anthropology, and a master stonemason. And he worked on a site, and he's the one that really got into how the stones were extracted from the bedrock and then how they were shaped. And we have them all over the hilltop today, these big slabs that are in situ. They were actually lifted off the bedrock, they were propped up by another stone, and then they were abandoned. And my son, Kelsey, who was on that History Channel, he was out doing some clearing a couple of years ago between semesters at college and found another dozen or so of these very large multi-ton stones sitting on the hill. And you have to kind of look for them because the foliage is covering them, and the soil has been very slowly covering them over time. But you can see them propped up with a stone. If you look underneath it, there's a propping stone, and some of these stones weigh 7, 8, 9, 10 tons. We have one that's probably about 14 tons up there. It's a very large one, and it's actually busted in half now. But it was actually propped up by somebody, and I think they had a bigger plan for our site. It was an ongoing thing, and then all of a sudden it came to a halt.
How far away are those? Is this the quarry or the source of the stones?
Oh, how did they quarry it?
Well, no. How far away is it from the site?
Oh, yeah, and this is uphill. Some of these stones are located about a quarter of a mile from the main site. Some of them are a little bit further than that, and from there it's kind of an uphill up to the site from there. So they would have had to drag them, between maybe a quarter of a mile and maybe a little bit further uphill, and then probably if that's where they're going to go with them, they would have had to drag them quite a ways uphill to the main site.
Well, how do you think they transported them, Dennis? Any idea?
That's a good question. The gentleman that I was mentioning there, he probably simple machinery, log rollers, inclined planes of earth, and log levers. And how they extracted these big stones from the bedrock is kind of, a mystery even to this gentleman who studied this for decades. We were just talking to him about a new project, actually, about a couple weeks ago, and he was still amazed as to how they extract some of these stones. Like there's a chamber called the double solar. It's actually a two-story structure, and the roof on the bottom story, if you will, is about 28 to 30,000 pound stone. They actually were able to raise that off the bedrock in one chunk, and then they used it for a roof slab. And Dave says, I don't know how they did that. He's still perplexed about that. He knows how they shape them, but he doesn't know how they extracted them. Even if they used heating and thermal shocking, and they used wooden wedges and natural cracks in the bedrock. But he says he's tried that, and it's all you get is little pieces of stone breaking off every time. So how they were able to do that is still a mystery.
There is a school of thought that the stones, especially for the pyramids, were levitated. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't there. I've heard that theory, though. Yeah, that'd make it a lot easier, wouldn't it?
It certainly would.
It would, yeah.
Yeah, the
was
molecular composition.
That was the sound levitation, was it?
There's several ways, doing it with sound vibration, chanting, changing the molecular weight of atomic weight. What about the 14-foot monolith? What do you suppose that was used for, Dennis?
Yeah, we had a doctor of astronomy from Penn State, and he was with us in the late 90s into the early part of the 2000s, I think around 2003, 2002. And unfortunately, he just retired from Penn State. He was there from 1964 up to that time. He was professor of archaeoastronomy, and he worked on this, on these ancient sites. Archaeoastronomy is the field of study of how these structures are aligned with the heavens, and he was involved with that, I guess, most of his life, and he became familiar with our site. So I guess around 1996 or 95, sometime around there, and then he began driving up in his car, from Penn State, began researching, and that's a stone that he put a little bit of time into, trying to figure out, what that stone's purpose was. He says it's lined with a star called Izar.
I-Z-A-R?
I'm sorry?
I-Z-A-R?
I-Z-A-R, I think it is, yeah, Izar.
Oh, okay.
It's in Bootes, I think. It's like a second brightest star in Bootes.
Okay.
So it's not an alpha, it's like a beta or whatever it is, but it's the next brightest one. But there's polar stars, which today is Polaris, and our site actually was aligned with a star called Thuban, or Alpha Draconis. It's Draco the dragon.
Oh, sure, yeah.
In the same one that the Great Pyramid is aligned with. So you go back around 4,000 years, and a little before that, Thuban was aligned with the pole. That's due to the precession of the equinoxes.
Mm-hmm.
On 13,000 years, there will be a star called Vega that will be aligned. So it's kind of a circle that the Earth's axis is making, and it will come back to Polaris again someday. But 4,000 years ago, Thuban was aligned with the poles, and that's when these people actually that set up our site set up a north stone aligned with Polaris, and the line goes right through the center of our astronomical viewing platform, and then it goes through a south pointing wall. But Izar is located to the left of that, to the northwest, I guess you would say. It is 14 feet. It has a slope on it, like the top of our summer solstice sunrise stone. It has kind of a slant to the top of it. It's asymmetrically shaped, but it looks a lot like some of the sites in Callanash over in Scotland. Oh gosh, there's a whole bunch of different sites over there that are some of the many thousands of sites in Europe that have the same type of sloping top. It's pretty neat. But he said there's not only pole stars, but the circumpolar stars, and then there's the polar circumpolar grazing that actually just skims the surface of the Earth, and then the other ones will be just rising and setting stars. Well, Izar at that time, for 100 years, around 4,000 years ago, and that was part of his work, and also Andrew Collins kind of confirmed it with one of his astronomical engineers, I guess he calls them. Anyway, he just confirmed it recently. He said it was about a 1-century time period that Izar would have actually touched the top of that stone during the course of an evening. It actually would have just touched it. And then after that time, or before that time, that 100-year window approximately, it wouldn't work because of that precession factor. It just wouldn't touch that stone. But it's a pretty cool stone. It fell over. It broke in 3 pieces. It's right next to one of the quarry sites where some of these stones were being extracted too, But it's laying down today, and it's broken, and it's what we call probably a menhir almost, because it means menhir means long
Yeah.
stone.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a monolith, but it's a really long monolith. So it might fall into the category of a menhir. So it's
It
pretty
sounds very strange and out of place. What we need to do, Dennis, it's just a little bit after the bottom of the hour. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, maybe we can wrap up this idea. And then I'd also like to get into the possible builders of this site, so we can get into that when we get back. So please don't go anywhere. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Supernatural Magazine, the UK's newest paranormal magazine, provides support to Spirit Radio, the Paranormal Experience. It is the magazine's goal to bring every aspect of supernatural news and research from around the world under one roof to create a universal platform for all those interested in the supernatural. More information is available at supernaturalmagazine.com. You are listening to Spirit Radio, the Paranormal Experience on WSCA 106.1 FM, and we'll be right back after this short break.
And you are tuned to WSCA 106.1 FM in Portsmouth's West End. And you are listening to Spirit Radio, the Paranormal Experience. And programming here on Portsmouth Radio is made possible by you, our members, and by Living Innovations, helping Seacoast seniors and people with disabilities to lead full and happy lives at home and in the community. For more information, visit livinginnovations.com. And some upcoming guests for the future shows.
Yes, our upcoming guest lineup starts with 4th of July, when Willy and I are actually going to be taking a break. July 11th, we're welcoming back Brad Olson, and he's going to return to wrap up our discussion on the second half of his travel guide history book titled Sacred Places, 108 Destinations Europe, and in that we'll be discussing more megaliths and sacred sites. July 18, we're welcoming back Sherry Brake, and she's the author of 7 books. She's also a paranormal investigator and owner and operator of Haunted Heartland Tours, and she's been doing that for the last 12 years. July 25th, we're welcoming for the first time Richard Southall, and he'll be discussing his latest publication titled Haunted Plantations of the South. Excuse me, and this book captures some of the South's history as it relates to past and present-day witness testimonies of ghostly occurrences. August 1st, Merle Fankhauser, who is a surf music musician extraordinaire, he's released a new CD, and he's going to come back to discuss his paranormal experiences while he lived in Hawaii. August 8th, we're welcoming Ellen Dugan, and we'll be discussing her new book, Natural Psychic. August 15th, Bill Hall returns, and he's going to be giving us the straight scoop about what's happening in Litchfield Hills, Connecticut, where he's chronicled his latest book, The Haunted House Diaries. And that wraps up our upcoming guest list.
Okay, so now we'll go back to the phones for tonight's guest from America's Stonehenge, Dennis Stone. Welcome back.
Welcome back, Dennis.
Oh, thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Okay,
so
Dennis,
before we jump into the history again, Willie had some questions of a paranormal nature to ask you.
Yes, I was there. It was approximately 3 years ago, I believe. You had a paranormal team in there who was doing ghost investigations. Is America's Stonehenge haunted?
Depends who you ask, I guess. It may be. We've had pictures taken up there by some of our visitors, and one of them was pretty neat. It was in what we call the Paddy area, and it looked like a misty kind of a ghostly kind of image of a person standing there, and we put it up for a couple of years. We had it on the internet for a while. It was kind of interesting, and these gentlemen said they just took a picture, and there it was. They were just going. It was in the daytime, actually. But we had a paranormal, ghost hunts going on for a number of years. Back in the 1970s, we had Hans Holzer. I don't know if you've heard of Hans Holzer.
Yes.
Yeah, he was up there, I think, a couple times. One of his books was called The Ghost I Met, and he brought a psychic in, and I think she was kind of famous, and I can't think...
Sybil Leek.
I think it's Sybil Leek keeps coming to mind. I was thinking of that while the ad was on, and trying to rack my brain because we're going back over 40 years ago, and that's the time that Betty Hill came in and visited the site, too, because I think she heard Hans Holzer was coming, and so we got to meet Betty, and then she kind of remained a friend of my mom's until she passed away, so I think we got to see Hans Holzer and her the same day, the same weekend, I guess it was. So that was kind of
So
neat.
what did Hans discover?
Well, he had his psychic, and it's over 40 years ago, and I think it went into one of his books. And if going back about 40 years, I could tell you what the story was on it, but it's probably we have a lot of files, files after files, and I know that his name is on one of our files. I hadn't looked at it lately to see what type of
What specifically?
Yeah, exactly what they saw or felt or recorded up there. But the groups still come up every fall in October, and they'll come in and they'll do like a pre-ghost briefing in the theater. Mm-hmm. We have a theater where we have a 10-minute video presentation, but we turn it off, and then the people can sit and they can go through this, probably I think a half-an-hour briefing of what they're going to see on the hill, and then they go up with the tour up to the site with the psychics and the people that lead this, and they go up there for a couple hours, and then they come down and they have like a post-briefing, and they show various images. They talk about what they felt or what they sensed. Or, I'm an airline pilot, so I've missed most of these. I usually work Friday through Mondays, so I've missed many of them. But my wife has seen many more of them than I have, and some of our other workers. But when I was on, they were seeing little orbs, I guess. They recorded some sort of like little orbs on their equipment, and I don't know exactly what it means. It is interesting that people seem to really enjoy it. And we do know there's a layering of cultures. We have a 7,300-year-old fire pit that the president of the Hampshire Archaeological Society, she was with us since 1989, and she ran a whole series of shovel test pits across the entire hilltop. And one of the test pits, she did a charcoal sample. It was not too far from the North Stone, and it dated 7,300 years. So there's human activity going on there, going way back. We think it is a religious site. So, if this sort of thing exists, then I would say that's a great place to look, because we think the site's a spiritual place, a religious place.
Yeah,
and that's certainly a place you'd want to look for that if you're interested in that.
Yeah, the night that I was there on one of the paranormal investigations, I did get a photo of a mist figure by the, I believe it's the well, is it?
The lower well?
Is that correct? Down at the bottom of the hill, there's a well
Yes,
site?
that's correct. There's two wells, the upper and lower well, and they did go down to where I took. I went right by the lower well, and they hung out maybe about 30 or 40 feet from there.
Yeah, the lower well, that's where it was then, yeah.
Yes, yep.
So, so I did get some evidence there myself that night. So.
No, and that area is really interesting. It's a swamp area. There's a well there. Mm-hmm. We found the remains of where they had like an open kiln, so somebody was making pottery. Some of the oldest pottery we found goes back between 2,000 and 2,500 years old from the glacial cliff shelters. So somebody was making middle woodland period time.
Yeah.
They were making pottery, and they were living up there. So we have different layers of cultures of people being there at different times in the past.
Well, I've got to ask you, Dennis, if you've got carbon dating, carbon-14 dating probably, going back to 7,300 years for that pit, what's to say that the site itself isn't equally as old or approximately that old?
Yeah, that fire pit didn't really, it wasn't up against any walls. It was near some walls, but it wasn't adjacent or right next to a wall. So like the other carbon datings we have about 16 carbon datings on the hill. Mm-hmm. Woods Hole Oceanographic did some of the tests, and Geochrome Laboratories in Cambridge, Mass. did some of the tests. But it has to be in a certain context to the structure. Like the North Stone, actually, we got that lady from the president of the Hampshire Archaeological Society joined us in 1989 because that stone was starting to tilt. So we began an excavation all around the stone, and they found right against the stone, several inches down, undisturbed fire pit, and all the layers, the strata was undisturbed.
Yeah.
The stratigraphy was not broken. So what we found was the stone was there first, and then somebody about 1,300 years ago, because it was about 600 AD was the dating on that carbon, plus or minus. So about 1,300 years ago, somebody built a fire in front of that stone. It didn't date when the stone was stood, but it tells us a minimum date that the stone was there 1,300 years ago. Because if that stone was stood up by the Patty family or somebody else, they would have disturbed the strata, and they would have busted the fire pit up. They would have just messed it all up. But that 7,300-year-old carbon dating was located about 20 feet away from there, but it wasn't next to a wall, and it wasn't next to the standing stone. It was just kind of by itself.
In an open area.
But it does tell us people were there. Now, we don't know if the site could be older, but the astronomical data seems to indicate that the site would work, as I mentioned, around 4,000 years ago, plus or minus. And that stone that star Izar does align for about a century, at that time.
Yeah.
And then the carbon dating of the north wall of the chambered ruins. And by the way, we're going to get back and trying to do work on that chamber. It started in 1964. We got 3 carbon datings out of that, and we also have 3 stones with inscriptions found in that chamber.
Well,
and
I want to get to...
the 7-ton roof slab fell in sometime in the past in the lintel stone. That whole thing collapsed. And it's a very interesting structure. Even in the 1940s, Gary Vesalius, a genius bird from the American Museum Natural History, was doing work on the site way back then, and they said that chamber there should have attention. It's got a high. I think I have what they said, but they said it's a very important structure. Has a lot. I think they said a lot of potential. And so in 1964, they tried to remove the roof and the lintel stone, but they didn't have the equipment.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to attempt it this fall. We have that gentleman I mentioned, the stonemason, and we have some other people lined up to not only excavate, but get the stone out of there so they can get in there and excavate. And so that structure has 2 windows. It has a doorway, it has an alleyway, and then again, it had 3 carbon datings, and then it had the 3 stones with inscriptions. So it might have other artifacts, a lot of it's never been dug before, the floor of it.
Let me ask one other question. You say that pit went back 7,300 years, and that other cycle is 4,100. So if the site is 4,000 years old, could it possibly be that it might even be another 4,000, maybe 100 years old, so that brings it to about 8,000, 8,002, which is right in about the same area as the 7,300 dating on the carbon. Do you think that perhaps it could go back another whole cycle?
Yeah, well, actually, the tilt cycle is 41,000 years.
Okay. 41,000. I thought it was 4,100.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And the precession of the equinoxes is 25,920 years.
Yeah.
It's about 1 degree every 72 years. I often wonder if that other cultures came up with different things like 72 virgins, 72 this, 72 that. I'm wondering if it's based on that. They knew that because 360 degrees, is a compass, and every degree it takes 72 years. And so it comes out to being 360 times 72 comes out to 25,920 years. But the other cycle is 41,000. They're not in sync. They're totally, they don't synchronize.
Yeah.
They're at odds. But good, that's a good thought on your part. If it was that, you might have something there. But
that would be cool, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's good that you're thinking, that's for sure. That's really good. But it was a 41,000-year cycle, so it's a long time.
Okay.
It's a long time.
My bad.
I need to be around for that, but... Well, but at the Harvard Smithsonian Center, when they sent us that results in 1977, they said, by the way, you have 23 star alignments. And we've only found Norse alignment with Polaris today and Thuban, 4,000. We only have that one, and we have the Izar stone, but we don't know if we have some of those helical sunrise alignments, too, because there's other standing stones there that we haven't identified.
Oh.
But when they did their analysis in 1977, they said, you have 23 other star alignments on your site. I'm like, wow, what?
Oh, wow, that is so neat.
So we need more research, and that's where that Dr. Winkler from Penn State was kind of getting into, and then he suddenly died, which is was really sad.
That's sad.
We miss him, but also his research abruptly stopped, so we need somebody to pick it up again, which is really sad that happened,
Well, getting along the lines of who built these, I know that Dr. Barry Feld was there, and he's a marine biologist from Harvard University, and that he wrote a book called America, BC. I guess he's an amateur epigrapher, and he was studying the inscriptions found there at the site. And some of them are Ugam, supposedly Ugam. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Yeah, it might be. We call it Ogam.
Ogam, there we go.
Oham, Ogam, or what you said. I've heard it pronounced usually Ogam or Oham, or Om, I guess. There's different ways of pronouncing it. We say Ogam,
Okay, so Ogam, Phoenician, and Iberian Punic.
Yes.
So that's quite that goes back quite a while, quite a ways. So, has anybody determined the source or the builders, the origin of this site? Do they think it was the Phoenicians?
That's the million-dollar question. We really don't know. What we tell our visitors, and on the web and everywhere, is we have evidence, that has been found over the last 7 or 8 decades almost now, and we let the public make up their mind, what they think the site is. But they have found inscriptions in that chamber of ruins. There were three different inscriptions. Three different inscriptions. One of them was Iberian Punic, as you mentioned.
Right.
The other one was Libyan, and the other one was actually a design on the rock, which is very similar to Iberian pottery, the same kind of design to it. So it wasn't really an inscription as much as it was a design. And we also found, in the Celtic oakum was also found, and that was found down in the basement of Mr. Patty's house. Apparently, it was a courtyard, and they modified it into a cellar. And some of the stones, when they were picking them up, and this one here you can hold in your hand, ended up in the middle, in the center wall. And today you use lolly columns in your house, the metal poles with the cement in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
They used those stone walls to support the middle of the house, and that's what we found in 1975. And there's been other carvings found around the hilltop, but they've been found from Maine all the way down to Brazil, and both Phoenician and Libyan, not as much, but also Iberian, the Celtic oakum has been found too, all the way out to the Milk River, out in Alberta, Canada. And are these things authentic? Are they fake? If they're real, who did them and when did they do them? But Barry felt that the Iberian Punic, Libyan, and Celtic oakum were actually from Iberia, Spain and Portugal, and just a little piece of France, I guess. But anyway, that was the area that, because of the style, it came from the Iberian Peninsula, not from somewhere else in Europe, but from that area. And he said that was a melting pot. The Phoenicians were there, the Celts were there, and the Libyans came across the Mediterranean, and they were there too.
Wow.
And then they might have leaped off there to the New World. That was kind of a theory he had.
Has anybody brought up the connection to the similarity between America's Stonehenge and Skara Brae, which is in the north of Scotland?
Yes, many people have been. I've been to Scotland, but I didn't get a chance to see Skara Brae. But many people, when they look at it, our site and that site, and I know Skara Brae was more of a living site.
It was.
It was a habitat. Our site, we think, is more of a religious site.
Ceremonial.
But they do draw that comparison of the stonework.
This seems very similar.
It is quite similar, yes. It is very, very similar. We have the corbelling. We have all the little hallways. We have closets. We have the little cells. We have the chambers.
Almost little table-like structures. The same, certainly the same structure. I don't think it was necessarily the same use, but they're similar.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, and our site, actually, when they built it, somebody thought it out too, because they built a whole network of underground drains. We've had criticism that how could your astronomical lines work if you have a forest up there? Well, that lady that was president of the Hampshire Archaeological Society began a shovel test pit study, and she found her husband was a doctor of geology too, as I mentioned. And what she found from that, one of the interesting things, so she said from those about 90 holes she stuck up on the hill, almost one per acre, was the hilltop was 75% bare. And when they built our site, they knew they had to drain the bedrock because the water wouldn't go anywhere. It would just puddle up on the bedrock. It didn't have anywhere to go. So they created a whole bunch of channels through the bedrock, and you can see that when you walk around on our site. We usually put white paint so you can see them a little bit easier. To the untrained eye, you might just walk over them. But these channels actually go through the bedrock, and then they go into underground drains. Yeah, and they created a whole network of these drains to keep the place dry.
A whole irrigation system.
Yeah, and it's a way of getting rid of water rather than and it diverts the water.
Yeah.
And drains are a great place to look for artifacts. And we get the Chamber and Ruins project going this year. We're going to look to see if that chamber has a drain, because every chamber up there seems to have a drain. The Oracle Chamber has 2 of them. Some run 75 feet. A little kid can climb through some of these. I wouldn't advise that because it'll get stuck.
You might get
so
stuck.
You can climb into these drains. But also the hilltop was bare, so you could see the sunrise, sunset, moonrise, and moonset, some of the star alignments. You wouldn't have the forest problem as we have today. And then another criticism, well, you're away from the ocean. Well, we're only 4 miles from the Merrimack River where it bends in Haverhill, Mass.
Oh,
which
access
is navigable,
way. Yeah.
And between that and our site, it's all swamps and waters and ponds and brooks. And we think that you could actually navigate up to within a mile or so of our site 4,000 years ago. That's something we're kind of working on to see what the water level was like.
Yeah.
The silting and the earthquakes have changed the course a little bit. And on the west side of the hill is the Spigot River, which is a tributary of the Merrimack. At the mouth of the Merrimack, 2010, they're putting a house in down there, not too far from the mouth of the Merrimack, and they found a Phoenician coin in the construction.
Really?
So
that's
exciting.
Cool too.
What's
Yes.
that doing there?
Oh my gosh. Well, Dennis, we've only got like 1 more minute left.
Oh, okay, yeah. It's going by so fast.
How about artifacts? Anything in particular that they found in the way of artifacts?
Well, we have the inscriptions. We have stone tools, hammer stones, rubbing stones, stone scrapers. People go, there's no artifacts. Well, there's thousands of artifacts that have been found, both historic and prehistoric. But there's a Stone Age technology going on with all these stone tools that have been found. Beautiful stone hoe, rubbing stones, stone axes, and stuff like that that came from the site.
How old?
So there are Stone Age tools coming out of there. There's also some, what we believe were bronze, like a dagger that came out of the site, and some other implements that were bronze. Mr. Goodwin collected them in the 1930s. And a lot of his artifacts, as well as some of the later archaeologists that were there. One of them that I mentioned before, I mentioned his name, I won't mention it again, but he had found hundreds and hundreds of artifacts. We do not know where these artifacts went. Some went back to Hartford, we think, but we don't know where they ended up. And some of them went with this other gentleman who's a professional archaeologist in the American Museum of Natural History. They don't know where these artifacts went. So some of the things we have photographs of, we can't hold them today. They're missing, you know.
What a shame.
But the site itself is a huge artifact, you know. So, we have stone tools and all that. We have historic, prehistoric. And the inscriptions, I think, are, really interesting artifacts, too.
And the prehistoric date back to when exactly? Any idea?
The stone tools can go back, they can go back, thousands of years.
Okay.
We do have Paleo Man in New Hampshire, going back between 10 and 12,000 years in the White Mountains. So people here as early as that in New Hampshire. Up in Jefferson, New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Archaeological Society was working on the site a few years ago, and that's where that lady that's working on our site was. But anyway, we have people in New Hampshire going back over 10,000 years now.
Wow.
All right.
Well, thank you for that history. That is just really interesting.
Oh, thank you.
You're well versed, Dennis.
Oh, thank you so much.
and we thank you very much for joining us tonight, Dennis. You want to give out the website, how people can contact you?
Oh, yes, we have a website. It's StonehengeUSA.com.
Okay.
And there's an email address if anybody has questions. And then we have the hours of operations. We're open every day, but Thanksgiving and Christmas. We do snowshoeing in the winter, and we have the alpacas up there. So there's a lot for people to see.
And
the alpacas are actually part of the camel family, and they're from North America. So it's part of the history of the place.
Are you working on a book?
No, my wife said I should. I'm just retiring from the airlines. Maybe I'll have time after I do.
You've got to work on a book.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dennis.
Okay.
We've enjoyed this tremendously.
Thank you, Dennis.
Well, thank both of you so much and your audience. I really appreciate it. And Mark Eddie, thank you so much for having me on this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Take
all
care.
right.
Take care. Bye-bye now.
Have a good night. Okay, very good. Dennis Stone from America's Stonehenge.
Another great history lesson. That was
Yes,
fun.
Another great show on Spirit Radio, the Paranormal Experience. And Craig is back. Craig
Wonderful.
Mosier with the
Great.
Graveyard Shift is coming up in just a couple of minutes.
Okay, so good night, everyone, and thank you for listening.